In America, the words gun control tend to, well, trigger people. So let's try to keep our emotions holstered and talk about the stricter gun laws on the horizon by reading through some of your emails. And I guess this is one way to keep COVID from spreading at the Oregon Capitol.
As enforcement agents pursuant to ORS 461.110.
Yeah, that's a computer reading all the bills to an empty room. Also, remember how Oregon was supposed to have that COVID exposure app by now? If you're wondering how that's going, just about as well as you think. Here's the story.
You thought I was going to come from over there. I don't know. Just keeping you on your toes. You know what I mean? It's something I do around here. I'm Dan Haggerty. Hi, welcome to the story. It is 6 o'clock, isn't it? All the ways to communicate with us at the bottom of the screen. Use that hashtag #HeyDan. In the meantime, I want to check in on Salem right off the top. We're a few months into the legislative session now. Things have been going fairly smoothly, I would say. I mean, we've hit a few bumps in the road here and there. The good news is no one has walked out. There was this one-day protest Republicans did over the state's COVID restrictions, but that was it. No real walkout, which is good news. The bad news is COVID. Obviously, the House had to cancel its floor session yesterday after a second person in a week tested positive in the Capitol. We don't know who. We don't know if it was a lawmaker or a staff member. They won't tell us. But regardless, this is a problem because there's a lot of work to do and there are a lot of bills to read on the floor. And I mean physically actually read them out loud. Now, they have the option to waive that requirement so they don't have to listen to, all 100 or so pages of a bill before voting on it. But Republicans have been kind of sticklers about this, and they have demanded that lawmakers actually read every single page of every single bill out loud. It's kind of a power move, honestly, since Republicans in the legislature don't really have much power otherwise. But with these new COVID cases, is it that good of a deal, or good of an idea, rather, to have someone standing up there on the dais, potentially spewing germs to everyone as they read these bills? No, not really. So instead, they got a computer to read them to an empty House chamber.
Every member of the Board of Commissioners of a port governed by ORS 777.005 to 777.725 or 777.915 to 777.953 t. Every member of the Board of Directors of an authority created under ORS 441.525 to 441.595.
I mean, I expected that to be pretty boring, but I didn't expect it to be excruciatingly boring. It was pretty cool, though, that they booked the GPS lady to do those readings. She's usually pretty busy telling people recalculating. What you probably don't know about this, I haven't seen it on any other news outlets. It's kind of like an exclusive here to the story. They had a bunch of other robots audition for that gig, and a source inside the Capitol leaked to us some of the tryouts.
Thank you, humans of Oregon. It is I, Optimus Prime.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't read these bills.
Stephanie! No disassemble bill number 5.
Wally. Evil. Evil.
I think it's pretty clear Wally didn't even read the job listing before applying to that. So one thing is worth noting, though, that one of the bills that the computer had to read today was one that this human talked about last night on the show. It has to do with gun control. And that brings us to tonight's big story. Senate Bill 554 is in the crosshairs tonight, and it has CHL holders freaking out all over the state. And here's why. See, if this thing passes, guns would be banned in the Capitol and other government buildings. And you might be saying, they're not now? No, not if you're a concealed handgun license holder, okay? Look, some of our lawmakers could be packing heat on the Senate floor right now if they have the right paperwork. No big deal. Actually, we know for a fact that it's happening in other local government buildings. Earlier this month, the Kaiser City manager's gun apparently went off inside of City Hall in his office. The mayor told the Statesman Journal that it was an accident and no one was hurt. Police investigated this and determined that there wasn't any crime committed here. But under SB 554, if that passes, it actually could be considered a crime. It would be. And that's not the only thing that has everyone all riled up. You see, the bill would also allow local governments and school districts and hospitals and universities to set up these gun-free zones if they wanted. Now, keep in mind, this is different than a no guns allowed sign that you might see hanging on the door of a business. This would be actual law. Let me explain the difference. See, most malls, for instance, don't let you carry a gun inside, but you can't be arrested for bringing one in if you have a CHL. I mean, they can ask you to leave, and if you refuse, police could hit you with trespassing maybe, but not a gun crime. SB 554 is much more serious. If it passes, anyone caught with a weapon on one of these prohibited public spaces could be found guilty of a Class C felony. And if you're a gun owner, you know exactly what that means.
If someone is convicted of a Class C felony, can they own a gun?
So it probably wouldn't be a lifetime bar, but it could temporarily prevent somebody from owning a gun.
So the concern with CHL holders here is that they are going to be walking throughout their life and maybe stumble into one of these gun-free zones at a hospital or a university and suddenly go from law-abiding citizen to somebody who could be arrested for a felony, and if they are arrested, could have their gun taken away from them. Is that a realistic fear to have?
Well, there is a part of the bill that requires signage indicating that guns are not permitted. And so certainly for entering a building, a gun owner should be made aware under the statute that they're not allowed to bring a firearm into the building. As you get into more public areas like lawns or courtyards, I would imagine that there is some requirement for signs, but that's where maybe there could be a little more fear.
A lot of our viewers have been talking about this. I've gotten some really great, thoughtful messages from our viewers. Matt, for instance, wrote me, said he was a certified safety instructor, and he said, in part, unbiased research will show that gun-free zones are really free-fire, helpless target zones and are the safest, easiest place for those who would do evil, least likely to be stopped. I'd be glad to share my resources with your staff or even take you for an informal trip to the range. I'd love a good trip to the range. I grew up in a hunting household. I'm still waiting for him to share those resources with me and our staff. But one thing that did kind of catch my attention is something that I've always been fascinated by, and it's that argument, the kind of the good guy with a gun argument. So let's look at how many good guys we have in Oregon, or at least people with CHLs. The Oregon State Police sent us this list today. It's a list of CHL holders from January of 2021, with a total of 285,068 people who can legally carry a concealed handgun. That's 6.68% of our entire population. That's higher than the national average. So hypothetically, let me put it to you this way. If you were at a packed Timbers game of 25,000, 1,670 people theoretically in that stadium would legally have a gun with them. Yes, I know you're not allowed to have a gun at Providence Park, and yes, I know not all CHL holders have their gun with them at all times, but it's a frame of reference. And the idea is, with the argument, that those people, if they were allowed to bring their guns inside, would deter a mass shooting more than the no-gun policy, because according to the argument, a mass shooter doesn't care about that policy anyway. But is this all true? Does it make sense? Well, it's kind of impossible to say. I mean, you can find many cases around the country when a CHL holder intervened after a person was shot and stopped that gunman. But how can you prove that gunman was going to commit a mass shooting if you stopped him before he did it? One example that pops up a lot in these conversations happened here in 2012 at Clackamas Town Center. A gunman walked inside with an AR-15 and started shooting. He fired 16 shots and killed 2 people. According to the police report, the gun kept jamming, and while he was trying to fix the jam, an armed shopper with a CHL faced him with a gun. The shopper never fired, but the shooter ran into a stairwell and took his own life. Here are the headlines that followed that. From KGW, on December 16th of that year, Clackamas Mall shooter faced man with concealed weapon. Then from the O, a month later, watch how they kind of change. Did armed citizens stop Kip Kinkle and Clackamas Mall shootings? Followed by this one, Clackamas Town Center shooting. Story of armed shopper fuels national debate. At the time, conservative radio hailed the shopper a hero and criticized the media for not echoing the same. Meanwhile, investigators really couldn't tell us and didn't know if that CHL holder actually affected the outcome at all, saying that they couldn't be sure either way. They couldn't tell. That's the nuance of this discussion as SB 554 chugs along. It has already passed in the Senate. It's got to go through the House now. We're going to keep you posted on what happens next. It's time to do our daily count. Let's talk vaccines, right? So right now, how are we doing overall in Oregon? Nice numbers. 1.13 million people with at least the first dose of that vaccine. The majority of them have gotten their second dose as well, but it works out to be more than 26% of the population of this state of Oregon. If we look at Washington, they crossed that pivotal 2 million people mark with at least the first dose of this vaccine, which works out to 27.4% of their state's population. Now, we've been getting a ton of questions, as we always do, night after night, regardless of what other topics we touch on. We get a lot of vaccine questions every single night from you guys, and keep using the hashtag HeyDan with them, because we'll keep sending them to our reporter/expert on the topic now, Pat Doris, to get you some answers.
The questions, they're coming in fast and furious. Keep them coming, gang. The first one from Nancy. She writes, at the time I got my first Pfizer vaccine from OHSU, I was assigned a date for my second dose, which was 28 days later. At the same time, I was also given an information sheet that said the second dose should be given 21 days after the first dose, which is right. Short answer is they're both right. Here's the deal. When Pfizer applied to the government for this emergency use authorization, they showed that they had done the study. And with the study, they gave people a shot, and then 21 days later gave them the booster shot, and that's what they found the results with. So they said that everybody should get that. The CDC said, 21, 42, anywhere in that range is probably going to be fine. They really did. And so OHSU points out they're following the CDC guidance and that it's just fine to give the Pfizer booster dose 28 days later. And since they're giving the Moderna booster dose 28 days later, it just really simplifies things. So that's their excuse. That's why they say they're doing that, because it would drive anyone crazy, I think, to have tens of thousands of people getting a booster 3 weeks later and then others getting it 4 weeks later. And anyway, not everybody's doing that, but OHSU is doing that, and they say that is exactly why they're doing that. So I hope that helps. You're going to be just fine. Our next question is from Chris. How are vaccines looking in all the counties? Well, Chris, thanks for that question. That's a huge question, man. That is a bigger question than we have time to get into right now. But because of you, I pulled out my specs and my handy dandy calculator, got onto the websites with a little help, found some of the OHA charts, Oregon Health Authority charts, and this is what I found. So I'm going to give you the updates from the 3 counties, both on testing and vaccination. Okay, ready? Go ahead and write this down at home if you want. For the week of 3/21 to 3/27, here's what we found out. That Multnomah County had a 2.5% positivity rate of the testing that was done, and that totaled about 543 people. Okay, not about, exactly. In Washington County, there was a 4.2% positive testing rate. That was 5,400 people who were infected. In Clackamas County, it was a 5% positivity rate. Statewide, 3.7% positivity rate for about 3,425 people. No idea why I keep saying about. It's exactly that number according to the Oregon Health Authority. Okay, and again, that was for the week of March 21st to the 27th. So if you want to know how Multnomah County is doing relative to the other 2 counties, Multnomah County's positive rate is lower, and it looks like Multnomah and Washington rates are both doing relatively well, although only Multnomah's is lower in that 1 week from the state. All right, then we went on to vaccinations. So what's happening in Multnomah County? One way to look at it, because every county has different populations, so the raw number of shots doesn't really tell you how they're doing based on the population. So the way that they do it is they say how many people per 100,000 people who live there. So that's the stats I'm going to give you now. In Multnomah County, as of today, there are 2,942 people who've been vaccinated for every 100,000 in the county. In Washington County, that number is 2,302 per 100,000. And in Clackamas County, the number is 2,323 people who've been vaccinated for every 100,000 who live there. So if you're doing a horse race on that, Multnomah County wins with 2,900. Washington County actually is coming in third place. It's Multnomah, Clackamas, Washington County for the number of people per 100,000 that are vaccinated. If you want a total for the number of people vaccinated in all three counties, it's 481,369. And that is as of today. And when the state's talking about people vaccinated, they mean one or both shots, but at least one shot. All right, Chris. That was an exhausting question. I hope that helps. I hope that's what you wanted to know. I hope you keep the questions coming in. That's what's going on with the COVID vaccine today.
Got Pat out of breath with that question. Nice question, Chris. Thank you. I got this question from David. What's the status of Oregon's contact tracing app? I thought it was supposed to be deployed by now. You are correct. It was, but we still don't have it. And to explain why, here's something we think is worth your time. The Oregonian published this story this morning. See, here's the deal. Last year, the health authority tested out their COVID exposure app at OSU, but that trial ended months ago, if you remember, and the app still hasn't launched. So where is it? Well, the Oregonian requested any records of an evaluation of how that trial went. How did it all go? Well, it turns out they don't have any. There aren't any. The health authority told them that they have no written report about the app's pilot program at OSU, even though they have said in the past that they were, quote, assessing the results of that trial. OHA told the Oregonian that this was because they had to suddenly shift focus to the vaccines in January. You know, the vaccine that came out of nowhere. How could anyone have been prepared for the thing the whole world was racing to produce and administer? OHA now says they're releasing a, quote, high-level summary report of the trial next week, which for my money is way better than a low-level or even a mid-level report. So we'll see.
Portland's talking about letting homeless camps and shelters that get approved to be set up in more areas of the city. So, what exactly does an approved camp look like? And anyone remember when this happened in Columbia County?
3, 2, 1, fire.
We'll dig into the KGW vault when the story continues.
Welcome back. I was just going through your emails and your tweets. Keep them coming using the hashtag HeyDan, or send your thoughts to the story at kgw.com. A bunch coming in about the discussion around guns and gun control, gun safety, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to pick a few of them, and we'll talk about it a little later at the end of the show. In the meantime, we've been talking a lot about the proposed zoning changes in Portland that would let city-sanctioned homeless camps and shelters open up in many more parts of the city. At first, a lot of people were worried about this, specifically because they thought they were going to be able to be going up in parks. And it sounded initially like that was going to be true, but the city council is clarifying the language to make sure that these shelters and camps are only allowed on paved spaces and not on any natural areas. They're going to be voting on this tomorrow. Now, the key word in this whole thing is city-sanctioned, because it only applies to camps and shelters run by agencies and nonprofits that are approved by the city. Doesn't mean someone can just set up a tent anywhere they want. So on that note, I got this email from a viewer who wrote this. Hey, Dan, how about an update on Portland's oldest sanctioned homeless community? It was a big story way back, but they must be doing something right since we never hear anything about them. They're talking about the Dignity Village, which has been a part of Portland's Sunderland neighborhood for about 20 years now. It was originally set up as an informal homeless camp, but the residents eventually formed a nonprofit. They got a contract with the city to run transitional housing campground there at the Sunderland Yard. They've got 43 tiny houses where about 60 people stay each night. There's also some basic amenities like a shared shower, portable toilets, office spaces, a greenhouse, and a computer lab. Residents pay $50 a month to stay there to contribute to the operating expenses for the village. There's also usually a wait list to get in. So when we're talking about the city-sanctioned camps and shelters in this new zoning proposal, this is kind of an example of what we're talking about. Though in this proposal, we're talking about temporary shelters that are not as permanent as the one you're seeing here. But this is kind of an idea. These aren't just these pop-up situations that don't have any backing behind them. Now, I got this question from Lori about one of Portland's favorite subjects, the arts tax. She asked, hey, Dan, I'm hoping you might be able to find out about the arts tax. Has the payment for that been moved out, like the filing for federal and state taxes? It's a good question, that $35 bill from the city. It was going to be due on April 15th, which was tax day. But since the IRS extended this year's deadline to May 17th, the city of Portland decided to extend it to that day as well. So now you've got an extra month to get your arts tax money in, which I've heard everyone just loves paying. And we've got another question tonight, this one from Stephen, who asked, hey Dan, what's going on with the old mill site in Oregon City? Are they still planning to create parks there for kayaking, etc.? The answer, Stephen, is yes, but it's going to be a while. The Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, they bought this property in 2019, and if you haven't seen it, it's the old Blue Heron Paper Mill Company. It's really cool looking. Right now, it's just a bunch of abandoned old buildings on the east bank of the river near Willamette Falls in Oregon City. The paper company shut down in 2011, so it actually looks, I don't know, a little creepy right now, but in a cool way, though it caught fire a few months ago in a not so cool way. Anyway, the mill was a major polluter for decades before it closed, but the tribe says that they want to make it a place of healing. Tribes were removed from that land in the 1800s under the Willamette River Treaty. So this area has a lot of significance to the tribe, and they want to use part of the space to educate people on the history of the land. The tribe says they're planning a river walk. They're going to have a restaurant space, public space near the falls. They have a big plan, office and retail, everything. The tribe was planning to break ground on the river walk last spring, but, you know, COVID ruins everything. Right now, they're working on deciding which buildings will stay and which buildings will go, and they're hoping to have their final plans released by the end of the year and start construction next year. But it should be really, really nice when it's done. Our Devin Haskins actually has a look at the plans. He had them last week. You can check out the story right now on kgw.com. Okay, got any questions? Let me hear them. We're going to read a few after the break. That's how this show works. And if you got a comment, let me hear it. We'll talk about it next. But first, we like to blow things up in Oregon. You know, like whales and boats and apparently nuclear power plants. I know that sounds a lot worse than it actually was. We're going to finish this story with a trip to the vault next. Welcome back. Does anybody remember when we had a nuclear power plant here in Oregon? Yeah, it was called the TROJAN nuclear power plant. It operated near the town of Rainier from the 70s to the 90s. And then, like we do with most things around here, we blew it up. Here's what we found in the KGW vault.
3, 2, 1, fire.
From the day the plans were proposed, the TROJAN plant was controversial. Local people needed jobs, PGE needed power to feed a growing region.
The proposed TROJAN plant would reportedly be safer than any nuclear plant ever built.
But design flaws plagued the plant. Steam tubes cracked, corroded, and leaked. After years of generating far less power than expected, PGE pulled the plug. In 1999, crews removed the core, sealed it, and barged it up the Columbia to Hanford. And on a recent clear day, one of the most iconic structures in the Pacific Northwest came crashing to the ground.
3, 2, 1, fire.
It took 8 seconds. And the most visible reminder of our experiment with nuclear power was gone.
I love the vault. I love it. I got a question about it just as we were running that from Larry. He said, keep bringing things out of the vault. What does the vault really look like? I wish I could tell you, Larry, but I'd have to, you know, top secret stuff. Brandon said the arts tax is due May 17th, not April 15th. That's what we said. Did we say that? Was that the story? Pretty sure that's what we said, right? I think that's what we said. Rewind. And then Tanya, also, she's calling us on our tax report. Aren't the state taxes due April 15th? I thought only federal got extended to May. Nope, state too. State is May 17th. You get a month and 2 days. Also, Mary says, what about calling it gun safety instead of gun control? You know, call it whatever you want. We're going to talk about controlling the sale, the distribution, the taxes. That's what these legislation is always about, controlling guns and how the role they play in America, right? Isn't that what it is? And then also somebody, I don't have the name here, Nancy. People with concealed weapon permits cannot take guns into federal buildings. That's correct. We're not talking about federal buildings. The state legislature isn't making federal law on what can happen in federal buildings. They're talking about state buildings. In fact, they're talking about public facilities. So hospitals and universities and things like that. So state stuff, not federal stuff. Don't bring a gun into a federal building. They don't like that. That's illegal. Anyway, that's the story for tonight. Keep those questions coming. We'll keep answering them for you. That's the story. We'll see you back here tomorrow.